Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, February 5th, 2024. The Senate meets to start on the $118 billion bill unveiled on Sunday that includes aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and changes to U.S. immigration and border security policies. But it's unclear whether a test vote this week in the Senate can get enough Republican support to reach the needed 60-vote threshold. And the House Republican leadership, in a joint statement, criticizing the border security provisions and calling the bill dead on arrival in the House. Iran-backed militias in the Middle East launched more attacks since Friday's retaliatory airstrikes by the U.S. against targets in Syria and Iraq, which had followed the militants' drone attack that killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan. We'll get the latest from the Pentagon. The Senate National Security Bill that has Palestinian aid restricts that money from going to the United Nations Palestinian Relief Agency. The State Department has more on that from today. Plus, the ranking Democrat on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party talks about whether there could be legislation targeting the social media app TikTok. And in Great Britain, announcement from Buckingham Palace that King Charles III has been diagnosed with cancer. They didn't say what form. And we'll get President Joe Biden's reaction. A story from The Hill. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky will face one of the toughest challenges of his career this week when he tries to muster Senate Republicans to vote for a Ukraine funding and border security package that former President Trump wants to kill. McConnell's initial goal, according to Senate GOP colleagues, was to get a border security deal that would have the support of at least half of his conference, which numbers 49 members. Now appears that the defense supplemental spending bill, which includes the border security provisions, as well as funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Indo-Pacific security, will get less Republican support than that. Aides are predicting between 12 and 20 Senate GOP votes for the bill, and that vote total will shift as lawmakers digest the text of the legislation, which was finally made public Sunday evening. That was the reporting from The Hill today. Senator Mitch McConnell spoke on the Senate floor.
And for 3 years, the president and his administration have tried to convince the American people not to believe their own eyes. They tried in vain to pretend that we weren't facing a crisis, but the country knows better. This is a humanitarian and security crisis of historic proportions. And Senate Republicans have insisted, not just for months, but for years, that this urgent crisis demanded action. 3 months ago, we asked our colleague, Senator Langford, to lead that action. In just the time since Washington Democrats finally decided to join him at the negotiating table, the president's border crisis made history all over again. December saw the highest daily and monthly tallies of illegal border crossings ever on record. The crisis has literally never been worse. This is the reality as the Senate begins careful consideration of the border security agreement announced last night. The gaping hole in our nation's sovereign borders on President Biden's watch is not going to heal itself, and the crater of American credibility after 3 years of the president's foreign policy will not repair itself either. Today, our adversaries are emboldened as terrorists and authoritarian thugs challenge the strongest military in the world. Our commander-in-chief is hesitant and self-deterred. It's long past time for the president to demonstrate more resolve and start imposing decisive costs on those who dare to attack America. And it's now time for Congress to take action on supplemental national security legislation that finally meets those challenges head on. I've spoken at length for months about the urgent need to invest in American hard power, stand with our allies, and start showing our adversaries that the world's foremost superpower intends to start acting like one again. My colleagues know where I stand. They know as well as I do that American adversaries in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran are working together to undermine us. And they know that the time has finally come for the Senate to respond with strength. The national security legislation we're preparing to take up will invest heavily in the capabilities and capacity America and our allies need to regain the upper hand over this emerging axis of authoritarians. Make no mistake, the gauntlet has been thrown, and America needs to pick it up.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. As for what's in the agreement, we'll start with U.S. border security. Again, this from thehill.com. An end to catch and release, a new power to close the border when crossings reach a threshold of 4,000 or more a day for 7 days, raising standards for asylum screening, making the process easier for migrants to get work authorization, eliminating the immigration court backlog, and $20 billion in funding for the border measures. And the entire national security package also has about $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, $10 billion in humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza. Total, according to the authors, $118 billion. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, also spoke today on the floor.
The $64,000 question now is whether or not senators can drown out the outside noise, drown out people like Donald Trump who want chaos, and do the right thing for America. I urge senators of goodwill on both sides of the aisle to do the right thing and turn the chaos out. History is going to look over our shoulders and ask if the Senate rose to the occasion. We must act. In a few moments, I will file cloture on the motion to proceed to the vehicle of the National Security Supplement. The vote will be the most important that the Senate has taken in a very long time to ensure America's future prosperity and security. That's how important the vote on this National Security Supplemental is. Senators should expect the first vote on this bill to come Wednesday. Everyone will have had 3 days to read this bill before taking a vote. We must keep working until the job is done. Passing this bill is too important to let the calendar get in the way. Now, getting to this point was never guaranteed. A security package that includes bipartisan border legislation is one of the hardest things the Senate has tackled in years. From the start, I said the only way we would succeed was if both sides were serious about reaching a bipartisan package. I worked very hard to give negotiators the space they needed to do their work and create an environment where bipartisanship could take root. Many on the hard right wanted to hijack this process by demanding we take up H.R. 2. But I made clear the only bill I would bring to the floor was one that could win bipartisan support. Not a single Democrat in the House or Senate voted for H.R. 2. Today, I am proud that after 4 months of hard negotiations, we indeed have a bipartisan agreement that is a product of compromise, hard work, and persistence. I am hopeful that enough senators understand that this bill is too important to let politics get in the way. Because if we fail the Ukrainian people, then Vladimir Putin will likely succeed in his invasion of Ukraine. Putin will be emboldened, and Western democracy will face the greatest threat it has seen in decades. If we don't help Israel defend itself against Hamas, the dangers of another October 7th will persist, and the war in the Middle East could grow much worse. If we don't deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, countless of innocent Palestinian civilians will be denied life-saving assistance that cannot wait. And if we don't secure our border right now, the crisis our Republican colleagues talk about so much is only going to get worse.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, Majority Leader on the Senate floor. The joint House Republican leadership put out a statement about the bill coming up in the Senate. Again, the combination of aid for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, humanitarian aid to Gaza, and the U.S. border security provisions. And that statement reads, House Republicans oppose the Senate immigration bill because it fails in every policy area needed to secure our border and would actually incentivize more illegal immigration. Among its many flaws, the bill expands work authorizations for illegal aliens while failing to include critical asylum reforms. Even worse, its language allowing illegals to be released from physical custody would effectively endorse the Biden catch-and-release policy. The so-called shutdown authority in the bill is anything but, riddled with loopholes that grant far too much discretionary authority to Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who has proven he will exploit every measure possible in defiance of the law to keep the border open. The bill also fails to adequately stop the president's abuse of parole authority and provides for taxpayer funds to fly and house illegal immigrants in hotels through the FEMA Shelter and Services Program. Again, this is the statement from the top 4 House Republican leaders. And it concludes, any consideration of this Senate bill in its current form is a waste of time. It is dead on arrival in the House. We encourage the U.S. Senate to reject it. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, spoke to reporters in the hallway today.
Are you killing the bill because of political considerations, sir?
No, look. I've been very clear from the very beginning about the elements that were necessary to solve the border crisis. These are not Republican talking points. This is what we have been told by the experts on the ground. And that includes the sheriffs there in the counties that are on the border. It includes Border Patrol agents, officers, longtime veterans of the agency. And they said you have to fix asylum. You have to fix parole. You have to end the catch and release, the mass release of immigrants around the country, illegals around the country, as has been happening. And you have to restore Remain in Mexico. You also need elements of the wall being built. I just don't believe that the Senate bill, as I've explained in all of our statements, meets the criteria that's necessary to solve the problem. That is what we are about here. It's our responsibility to do it. It's what the American people want. It's what we're going to continue to work on.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson with reporters today in the U.S. Capitol building. Donald Trump, former president and 2024 Republican presidential candidate, posting on Truth Social, "This bill is a great gift to the Democrats and a death wish for the Republican Party. It takes the horrible job the Democrats have done on immigration and the border, absolves them, and puts it all squarely on the shoulders of Republicans. Don't be stupid. We need a separate border and immigration bill. It should not be tied to foreign aid in any way, shape, or form." President Biden putting out a statement on Sunday when this bill was released. He, of course, is a 2024 Democratic presidential candidate that begins what's been negotiated would, if passed into law, be the toughest and fairest set of reforms to secure the border we've ever had in our country. He says, for everyone who is demanding tougher border control, this is the way to do it. If you're serious about the border crisis, pass a bipartisan bill, and I will sign it. This morning, C-SPAN spoke with Punchbowl News Congress reporter Mika Solner about what's happening today in the Senate.
Obviously, we saw the text coming after 4 months of negotiations among Senate lawmakers there who were trying to tie foreign aid with the border, the domestic issue that's really grappled Capitol Hill. Republicans have really tried to tie these two together because of the opposition for more Ukraine funding and other elements of foreign aid that's really kind of risen with the rise of some of these more conservative, America First type lawmakers in the Senate that have followed former President Trump's foreign policy style. So we saw $118 billion that is being allocated, including 60 for Ukraine. So I think that there's a lot of controversy right now. There's a lot of disagreement in terms of, where this bill is going to go and if it's even going to remain alive in the Senate. And of course, in the House, we heard Speaker Mike Johnson say that this bill is already dead on arrival, given several elements that House conservatives disagree with.
Such as what?
I think the Ukraine element is a big driving factor. We saw the House Freedom Caucus come out yesterday in opposition of it, saying that one member in particular, Lauren Boebert, said, you should never tie the border with foreign aid, despite, conservatives saying that, that's what they wanted all along if they're going to pass any kind of foreign aid to Ukraine. So that's a big driving factor. The other thing that I'm hearing from Republicans is that they're saying that this does not do anything to actually secure the border and does not go far enough on some of these border provisions that is in the text of the bill. And of course, we know that House Republicans passed a hardline immigration bill last year, and they only wanted to see that passed alongside any kind of foreign aid bill or an equivalent of that.
One of some of the provisions on the border security side, $20 billion for immigration enforcement, as they're describing it. That's including the hiring of new officers to evaluate asylum claims, and expulsion authority that kicks in if a certain amount of illegal border crossings take place. And then migrants could still apply for a port of entry. If that's what's laid out, how much more, how much more do Republicans want other than this, what they're seeing in the text?
We're seeing the Senate negotiators are saying that there's a lot of misinformation that's being spread. One of those being that this would actually increase illegal immigration to the United States, which is not what this bill would do. What was in the package that House Republicans passed last year included, really strong elements that obviously Democrats would reject, like the resurrection of Trump's wall, for example, and other measures that would really crack down on the migrants crossing the border. But that said, I do want to add that the only solution really that House Republicans have really come up with since that bill is trying to just impeach DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, which is also going to come up for a vote this week. So obviously this is the border and immigration, huge topic on Capitol Hill that's divided everyone in each party. So this is an issue that's not going to go away, and it's a really, really sensitive, difficult, challenging problem to fix.
Mika Solner, Punchbowl News congressional reporter on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, putting out a statement saying no self-respecting senator should agree to vote on this 370-page bill this week. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, called it an open borders bill if I've ever seen one. Senator Steve Daines, Republican from Montana, chair of the Senate Republican Campaign Committee, said that he would oppose the bill, and Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, top ally of the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, said Monday he has serious concerns. But all three major negotiators on the Senate bill promoted it today. We begin with Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, on Fox News.
Here's what Speaker Johnson said. I have seen enough. This bill is even worse than we expected. It won't come close to ending the border catastrophe the president has created. As the lead Democrat negotiator proclaimed, under this legislation, the border never closes. If this bill reaches the House, it will be dead on arrival. Your thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, he would step out and be able to say that right away before, obviously, he had had a chance to be able to read it as well and to be able to go through it. The key aspect of this, again, is are we as Republicans going to have press conferences and complain the border's bad and then intentionally leave it open? After the worst month in American history in December, now we've got to actually determine, are we going to just complain about things, or are we going to actually address and to change as many things as we can? If we have the shot, and it's amazing to me, if I go back 2 months ago and say we had the shot under a Democrat president to dramatically increase detention beds, deportation flights, lock down the border, to be able to change the asylum laws, right, to be able to accelerate the process, no one would have believed it. And now no one actually wants to be able to fix it and says, I don't want to even debate it. I don't want to discuss it. We have to decide as Republicans, what are we going to actually do about the border? Leave it open or actually leave it closed?
Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, on Fox News today. He negotiated this border bill alongside Senator Christopher Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, who was on MSNBC.
The vast middle of America believes two things. One, they're proud of this nation's history of immigration. They still want people to come to this country if they're legitimately fleeing violence or terror or torture. But they also believe that that's got to be done in a rules-based order. And they see chaos. They see a border that's out of control. And so they want politicians to stop playing politics with this issue. They want their leaders in Washington to come together and try to find a solution. And that's what we've done here, somewhat implausibly. And so, yes, I think there's going to be enormous pressure on members to just make a decision. Do you want the issue of immigration to be a perpetual political cudgel, just fodder for campaign ads? Or do you want to actually solve a problem? And to your more specific point, we do see migrants right now living on the streets, crowding our homeless shelters. Well, this bill specifically addresses that crisis because it also gives more immediate work authorizations to immigrants who come to this country and who are legitimately likely to win their case for asylum. And so this bill is very thoughtful and targeted in the ways that it cleans up a very broken border system, but also helps our cities and our governors and our mayors deal with the consequences of that broken system.
Senator Christopher Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, on MSNBC. He negotiated the border security agreement that's now before the Senate, along with Republican Senator James Lankford and the third senator in the group, Kyrsten Sinema, independent from Arizona, who was on KTAR radio in Glendale.
As you the Speaker's statement came out last night, very shortly after the bill came out. So I'm assuming he and his team are still going through the bill and learning about it. There continues to be a lot of misinformation and, frankly, lies that are running around about this legislation. In fact, I got to tell you, the part that is most shocking to me is this lie about letting 5,000 people a day in the country. This is actually one of the most important parts of the bill because it forces the government to shut down the border, which we've been asking for since the end of Title 42. So I think when cooler heads prevail and people actually take the time to read the bill and understand it, I think that people will get to make their own choice. Do they want to secure the border, or do they want to continue complaining about it as we head into an election? And those are really the two choices that we face, Mike. And I mean, this won't surprise you, but everyone knows exactly where I stand on this one. I actually want to secure the border. It is a national security crisis, and we can't afford 9 or 10 more months of people complaining about it as we head into an election. What we really need to do is just solve the problem.
Senator Kirsten Sinema, independent from Arizona on KTAR Radio, Glendale, Arizona. After that interview she posted, great news. The National Border Patrol Council just endorsed our border security bill. These men and women are on the front lines of the border crisis, and they know what it takes to fix our broken system. Proud to have their support. While a number of Republican senators have issued statements in opposition to this bill, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, writing, "Now that the Senate's national security supplemental text has been released, I look forward to the amendment process to try to improve the bill. Something this significant cannot be rushed and jammed through. It should be subject to a robust debate and amendment process in the Senate. Otherwise, the bill will die because of the process." And the Hill writes at least 2 Democrats have expressed opposition to the border package, Alex Padilla of California and Bob Menendez of New Jersey. And they also note that Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, is expected to vote against the bill unless it restricts military aid to Israel. Republican Congressman John Joyce of Pennsylvania spoke on the House floor this morning against this bill.
Last night, the Senate released a text of legislation that would do irreparable harm to our border security. By announcing a plan that permits thousands of illegal immigrants to enter the United States and creates new avenues for asylum, this is a bill that will only make our nation more dangerous. Incentivizing more illegal immigration will not address the crisis that has been created in border communities like Eagle Pass, Texas, or in major cities like New York, where schools have been forced to close in order to house undocumented migrants. Since Joe Biden took office, there have been more than 8 million illegal border crossings and 1.7 million known getaways that have evaded our Border Patrol agents. This massive surge has led to Border Patrol agents being forced to suspend vehicle inspections and patrols in order to handle the influx, leading to more opportunities for cartels to bring dangerous drugs like heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States. It is clear that these issues are not being addressed by Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, and that his policies have contributed to a national security crisis. Despite clear evidence that his refusal to comply with the law has led to unprecedented levels of illegal immigration, Secretary Mayorkas has implemented a catch-and-release scheme, violating detention requirements and misusing parole authority. It's clear that the House must act to impeach Secretary Mayorkas and finally hold the Biden administration accountable for putting American lives at risk by allowing an open southern border.
Congressman John Joyce, Republican from Pennsylvania, today on the House floor, and the House is expected to take up the impeachment articles against Secretary Mayorkas sometime this week. You can follow that on C-SPAN television, gavel to gavel, and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. And over in the Senate, also on C-SPAN 2 television and on our free app. First test vote on the border security package, along with aid to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan and the Palestinian civilians. That's expected on Wednesday. And 60 votes needed to advance the bill. Wall Street today, the Dow down 274, NASDAQ down 31, S&P down 15. CNBC writes that stocks fell Monday as Treasury yields spiked higher on concerns that the Federal Reserve may not cut rates as much as expected. Fed Chair Jerome Powell on Sunday also reiterated comments made after last week's January policy meeting suggesting that a rate cut in March was unlikely. The Fed Chair Jerome Powell made the comments about interest rates on the CBS News program 60 Minutes on Sunday.
I think it's not likely that this committee will reach that level of confidence in time for the March meeting, which is in 7 weeks.
The next committee vote, then, would be in May.
How would you characterize the consensus around this table for rate cuts? Is everyone on board?
Almost all of the 19 participants who sit around this table believe that it will be appropriate in their most likely case for us to cut the federal funds rate this year.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, part of his interview on CBS's 60 Minutes on Sunday. President Joe Biden talked about the economy as he stopped by an employee cafeteria at a Las Vegas hotel today.
We've created almost 15 million brand new jobs just in 3 years, more than any president has in American history in that period of time. We've actually made sure that we have all kinds of additional help. People are getting the paychecks for Hispanics. They're making 40% more money than they did before we started in terms of wealth. African Americans, 50%. It's about everybody. It's not about just one group of people. Because when we all do well, everybody does well. I really mean it. So I came to say thank you. Not just thank you for the support you've given me last time out and this time, but thank you for having a faith in the union. Thank you for continuing to push it, because it really matters. It matters, it matters, it matters. And so, like I said, my dad would say it's all about dignity, being treated with dignity. My dad would no more walk by the shoe shine guy in the Hotel DuPont, where the DuPont company was, if he saw the chairman of the board, he'd say hi, but he'd walk over and make sure he said hi to the shoe shine guy too, because that's what we're all about. That's what built America, and we're coming back. We really are. We have the best economy in the world. Inflation is coming down. There's still too expensive, too much expense, and a little bit of corporate greed going on too. Nationwide. There's a little article written. You get your connection to it. It's called. There's about what's happened with the Snickers bars. Yeah. Snickers bars, you know that candy? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they haven't raised the price of a Snicker bar. They just took 10% of it out. Oh no, it's less smaller. So that's how they're making more money. But anyway, I thank you for all you do and the way you make people happy. And I know it's not always easy. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.
President Joe Biden with culinary union workers in an employee cafeteria at the Vdara Hotel in Las Vegas. The Nevada Democratic presidential primary is Tuesday, February 6th. The Poor People's Campaign held a news conference today in Washington about their voter mobilization plans. The campaign says there are 135 million poor and low-wage people, and that's rising back towards 140 million because of the ending COVID-19 relief. Reverend William Barber is the group's co-chair.
For far too long, extremists have blamed poor people and low-wage people for their plight, while moderates too often have ignored poor people, appealing instead to the so-called middle class. Meanwhile, poor and low-income, low-wage people have become nearly half of this country, and we are here today to make one thing clear. Poor and low-wage brothers and sisters have the power to determine and decide the 2024 elections and elections beyond. During the 2016 election, there were 34 million poor and low-wealth people who were eligible to vote but didn't. These voters make up more than a quarter of the entire electorate. In our study that was done, Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low-Income Americans in 2020 by Robert Paul Hartley, Assistant Professor of Social Work at Columbia University, along with Charlie Gupta Barnes, we found that a major reason poor and low-income people aren't voting is because political campaigns do not talk to them, do not speak to their issues. We found out that in our election cycle, sometimes we have 15, 20 debates for president, and not one of those debates, not 15 minutes, not 30 minutes, not 10 minutes is even given to raising questions about how the policies of that particular party or politician will impact nearly 50% of the electorate in this country and of the citizenship. Most Americans recognize we need a third Reconstruction. And the only way we're going to do it is by changing the political landscape. And the only way we're going to do it is by mobilizing poor and low-income, low-wage voters. Poverty is now the fourth leading cause of death in America, a moral crisis, taking the lives of 800 people every day. And this is before COVID and after COVID. We can no longer accept that over 135 million of our neighbors are poor and low wealth in this country. And while they are disproportionately percentage-wise black, 55% or 22 million plus people, the hard truth also is that the large majority, nearly 60 million, are our white brothers and sisters as well. We must address these issues. These are not marginal issues. These are issues that must be at the center of the narrative of a democracy in our country if we're serious about saving the democracy.
Reverend William Barber, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, at a news conference today. The group plans a day of nationally coordinated, simultaneous direct action in 31-plus state capitals on March 2nd. And their agenda includes a living wage, at least $15 an hour, health care for all, affordable, adequate housing, environmental justice, fully funded public education, just immigration laws, and they say an end to systemic racism, white supremacy, and the extremist political agenda. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, this is Rachel from C-SPAN's podcast team. I'd like to introduce you to one of the producers here at C-SPAN, my colleague Sean.
Thanks, Rachel. If you're a fan of Washington Today, we think you'll also like our evening newsletter, Word for Word, which brings you a recap of the day's most important political and policy events delivered right to your inbox. Read about what happened on Capitol Hill and at the White House, and watch video highlights featuring the day's newsmakers. Hear them word for word.
Join our community of informed listeners and viewers. Head over to cspan.org/connect and subscribe to Word for Word today.
Thanks for listening and staying connected with Word for Word. Subscribe now at cspan.org/connect. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. It's free and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from CBS News: an Iran-backed militia group in Iraq claimed responsibility Monday for a drone strike against a base in eastern Syria used by U.S. troops that killed 6 American allied Kurdish fighters. The attack, which caused no American casualties, appeared to be the first significant response from what the U.S. calls Iran's proxy groups to U.S. airstrikes against the militias in the region. On Friday, the U.S. started striking the militias of an umbrella group known as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. In response to those groups, stepped up attacks on U.S. bases in the region, including the deadly drone strike on a base in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members on January 28th. That reporting from CBS News. This came up today at the Pentagon with the press secretary, Major General Pat Ryder.
There have been 3 attacks by Iranian proxy forces in Syria since Friday. You say that the assessment is that the strikes on Friday night had good effects. How can you say that when there's 3 more attacks? What will the response be? And are the troops at those bases, those outposts, allowed to leave the base and to pursue those who are firing rockets and drones at the bases?
Yeah, so a couple things, Jennifer. So first of all, on your last comment, our forces will always maintain the inherent right of self-defense. So if they need to take appropriate actions to defend themselves, they will, and you've seen us do that in the past. In terms of attacks in Iraq and Syria since we took these strikes on Friday, I'm actually only tracking 2 incidents. There was one attack on Saturday, February the 3rd, that was 2 rockets that were fired at MSS Euphrates in Syria with no injuries or damage reported. And then I'm aware of one yesterday, February 4th. This was a one-way attack drone that landed several kilometers from MSS Green Village. Also in Syria, again, no reported U.S. injuries or damage to those facilities. Again, the strikes that we took on Friday were in response, as I highlighted in my topper, to the attacks on U.S. forces at Jordan. And again, we'll take necessary action to defend our forces.
But Pat, I believe that there was a third strike that killed 6 SDF Kurdish fighters.
I think the one you're referring to is the latter one that I highlighted. And I am aware of those reports of Syria Democratic forces killed in that strike, but I'd have to refer you to them to talk about that.
It was not on a base where U.S. forces were.
It was in the vicinity of Green Village.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder. Arab News reports the United Nations Security Council was to convene Monday at Russia's demand to discuss U.S. airstrikes on the Iran-backed groups in Iraq and Syria in retaliation for a deadly drone attack on American soldiers. The meeting, scheduled for 4 p.m. Eastern, was requested urgently by Moscow, which labeled the U.S. strikes acts of aggression against sovereign states and said they were raising tensions in the Middle East as the Israel-Hamas war rages. Stefan Dujarric, spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General, was asked about this at his news conference.
On the retaliation attack by the U.S. in Syria and Iraq, we saw both Syrian government and some of the officials in Iraq condemn or at least showed concern on this retaliation. Does the UN Secretary General believe this is a violation of the territory integrity and sovereignty?
I mean, we are very concerned about the risk of escalation in the region as a whole. I think we have seen kinetic activity in large parts of the region over the weekend, and our call is for de-escalation and to avoid of any further steps that make things worse.
Is it a violation?
I've answered the question to the best of my ability.
Stefan Dujarric, spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General at the UN News Conference in New York City. He also announced that the Secretary General has appointed an independent review group to examine internal policies at the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, known by the acronym UNRWA, after the allegations that some of that agency's workers took part in the October 7th Hamas terror attack in Israel. The bill pending in the U.S. Senate that provides military aid to Israel and humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, that same bill that has aid for Ukraine and Taiwan and the U.S. border security provisions, has language limiting aid to UNRWA. U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel got a question today at his news conference about this.
The supplemental that came out from the Senate, some senators yesterday, included a line saying that the funding can't go to the UN agency UNRWA. You've obviously suspended new aid to UNRWA, but does the administration support sort of putting the language in the legislation so that funding can't be sent to this agency?
So, look, broadly as it relates to the draft legislation, I think you saw the statement from the president over the weekend about the overall package and the administration's support for it. I'm not going to get into sort of the back and forth or the internal deliberations of how we got to, what versions of the text or not. But I think to take a step back, Simon, the United States is pushing for an immediate and serious investigation into the allegations at UNRWA. We've been talking about those for a couple of weeks now. As you know, the United Nations has already launched an investigation. The Secretary General this morning just announced an independent review led by former French Foreign Minister Colonna on UNRWA policies and procedures with recommendations. All of those things will be under review, I imagine. From the U.S.'s perspective, we want to see concrete results for these approaches. And meanwhile, we're going to continue to consult closely with other donors on how to continue to meet urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza. We also simultaneously, as you heard Matt talk about, we of course want to be able to continue supporting the important work that is happening in Gaza and the region, and we are looking at what options exist for supporting civilians in Gaza through partners like the World Food Program, UNICEF, and other NGOs. When it comes to the supplemental, all of this, of course, is public information. The bill includes $10 billion in humanitarian assistance that the president requested. That $10 billion is for global needs, including those impacted by the war in Ukraine, as well as the conflict in Gaza. Of that $10 billion, we expect $1.4 billion to be planned for Gaza. This is tangible money that we believe will save lives and have a direct impact on Palestinian civilians. And we will redirect funding for UNRWA to other partners to provide assistance in Gaza. Some of those examples I gave, the World Food Program, UNICEF, and other NGOs. This is a process we're going to continue to work through with appropriate regional interlocutors and other donor countries as well.
Vedant Patel, the United States State Department deputy spokesperson at his news conference at the State Department in Washington, D.C. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making his fifth trip to the Middle East since the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel and the start of the war between the two. Secretary visiting Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and Israel. From Semaphore.com, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat of Illinois, the ranking member on the House Select Committee on China, said he had concerns about TikTok's U.S. operations but did not support a total ban on the app. The congressman was interviewed by Semaphore's Morgan Chalfant at a Semaphore program today, and during his answer, he cited TikTok's response to the war between Israel and Hamas.
Glad you mentioned TikTok because I did want to ask about that. I noticed that it came up a couple of times at your hearing with Director Wray and other top intelligence officials last week. The committee has endorsed some kind of action on TikTok, a ban or a forced sale. What's the path forward for that and legislation? Do you see that potentially happening this year?
Potentially. I think that what we've seen is that there's kind of an interesting coming together of people on both sides on this particular issue, especially after October 7th and the Hamas attacks in Israel. People are even more concerned about the manipulation of the algorithm on TikTok by ByteDance. They are also concerned about the fact that Forbes journalists have been surveilled using American user data by ByteDance. So these are Chinese-based employees, even after Project Texas was launched. We've also learned that the CCP actually inspected some of this data at ByteDance, again, after Project Texas was launched. And so given these issues, given what the CEO of TikTok said on Capitol Hill and how some of it doesn't seem to hold up, I think that there's increasing interest in this particular area.
Do you worry at all about the potential political blowback, either from voters that use the platform or that, just the ability to use the platform to connect with voters?
Sure. I don't want to see a ban. I think that, TikTok, plays an important role for different businesses, especially small businesses. I know there are a lot of people who love the dance videos. Raise your hand if you're one of them. I see someone in the corner here. But the concern is this, which is that if it's owned by a company that's beholden to the CCP, then you have a new level of concern, even beyond the typical social media company. So what Chris Wray said in the hearing the other day is that, look, we all share the privacy concerns and especially about our data with regard to Facebook, Instagram, X, you name the social media platform. We are deeply concerned about that. However, where you have a social media company owned by a company beholden to the CCP, then you have a new level of national security risk. And there the Biden administration has been emphatic about the need to address it. And so I think as a committee, we have to listen to the administration.
Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, Democrat from Illinois, ranking member on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, today at a Semaphore event. Associated Press in London reporting that King Charles III has been diagnosed with a form of cancer and has begun treatment. Buckingham Palace said Monday, less than 18 months into his reign, he will suspend public duties but will continue with state business and won't be handing over his constitutional roles as head of state. The palace said the cancer is not related to the king's recent treatment for a benign prostate condition. It did not say what form of cancer the 75-year-old monarch has. This news broke as the U.S. State Department briefing was underway.
Buckingham Palace just announced that King Charles has been diagnosed with cancer. Any reaction to this news surrounding His Majesty?
I didn't see that report before coming out. So certainly, first and foremost, our thoughts are with the king. This is really with the king and his family. That's incredibly sad news, and hope that actually that's very sad, and I'm very sorry for the king and his family.
The State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel, and from President Joe Biden, a reporter asked him as he was at that event with employees at the Las Vegas hotel.
Yes, glad to call. I'm concerned about him. Just heard his diagnosis, but I'll be talking to him, God willing.
And what's next on the border bill? Border bill, sir. What's next?
That's President Biden in Las Vegas. More from the Buckingham Palace statement, saying the king has chosen to share his diagnosis to prevent speculation and in the hope it may assist public understanding for all those around the world who are affected by cancer. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. It's free, and get the stories making the headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.